What is up, you back again with another video. In today's video, man, we got some crazy stuff going on here. So, I wanted to do another My Book episode like I had been doing. So we left off last time at chapter 11. But I want to do something different for the next couple of episodes. And by couple, probably in the next 20 or so. This is something that I've been really just thinking a lot about because I haven't been writing a whole lot. I'm kind of having a writer's block. And as a writer block is kind of going away, I'm kind of in this weird area where I'm currently writing a chapter based on the civilian life of this whole war, right from the early 2040s until now. I think we're in the book at 2111 year, and so we're in this time period. I wanted to really kind of discuss this civilian aspect because it's something I haven't really touched on in the book before, and it's kind of an important era for just in general for this entire war. I mean, the civilians are a huge aspect of why the EDF and the troops on the ground fighting in battles on every continent are fighting so hard and for so long because of the civilian aspect, right? I mean, if there was no civilians, there'd be no reason for the armies to continue fighting. They would just confide, right? They would just disperse and survive by themselves, and instead of fighting in a war situation where a majority of men are dying. And so the next couple of episodes are really going to be leaning into stories and letters of battles, and also going into battle Pacific, so tactical positionings, talking about battles that aren't featured in the book. So if you're interested in learning some background battles, some things that I won't be discussing in the book for lore, that'll all be in these videos, and we'll talk about small battles, skirmishes, massacres, ambushes, strategic positioning for troops, strategics for troop movements and supply trains, and all that type of stuff. And technology, we'll be going into how vehicles and planes and guns and armor and all that's made. I do touch a little bit on that in the book, but we can go finer detail in episodes. So over the coming weeks, you're going to see more of these episodes. I really want to get back into doing series again. Now that I'm pretty much done grinding for Season 2, I'm just doing levels now. Majority of guns are bioluminescent or ready for bioluminescent. But I just haven't been haven't been having the best luck on zombies the last 2 days, so I might put that on hold until my luck is back. But without further ado, we're going to go into this week's episode. And this episode is going to be going into a battle outside of Nigeria. It was a small detachment of around 500 EDF Marines. Now, these Marines were all battle-hardened. We're talking hardcore battle-hardened. They were at the Battle of D.C., they were at the Battle of Los Angeles, the Battle of Miami, the Battle of Florida. In the Battle of Florida, they were up in the London campaign, or they would become part of the London campaign after this battle. So these were hardened troops. These were not your base troops just from basic training that just got launched down to the front lines. These were guys that were, have been in this conflict for upwards of 20 years, 30 years, upwards to even longer than that for the lieutenants, commanders, and generals in this squad. So they were stationed outside of Nigeria, and the battle was not actually supposed to happen. It was a complete accident. They were stationed there to hold the western front of Nigeria. It was a small forest outside of Nigeria. The coordinates are unknown at this time in the story, and still unknown to this day. They were sent and dropped off around 3 kilometers from where their battle happened. The last report came at 0300 on a Saturday, asking for aerial assistance at the Battle of the Woods. Now, the Battle of the Woods was horrifying for many. You're talking about an era where many forces in this time didn't get a lot of hand-to-hand combat with the Exil, okay? Most times you were being pulled out before it got that serious. Because the Exil, they are just monsters when it comes to hand-to-hand combat. I mean, we're talking about 7-foot-tall, 300-pound pure metal machines that are designed to be superior physically in every aspect. And so our human bodies weren't capable of fighting these machines. And so for a majority of the war, we stayed away from any type of hand-to-hand combat situations. So anything that would involve us having to fight with our bare hands or blades was frowned upon. So often, actually, that most soldiers didn't have blades on them, period. Um, and unfortunately, this group that was in Nigeria learned the hard way. At 0400, the the attack really commenced. So around 0200 on a Saturday in 2111, they began being bombarded by heavy mortars. So the Exil were really well known for mortars. Now they had missiles and they had tanks and they had their aircraft, they had all their own technologies, but they really were superior in the idea of mortars. And now mortars have been a thing in military terminology for millennia, right? For absolutely millennia. Um, Side note here, I'm probably gonna have to extend this video clip and use some gameplay from yesterday's video, just because I want to get this. I wanted to talk about this, but I don't have any extra for gameplay. But that's just a side note. So if you see some duplicate gameplay from yesterday, just ignore it. But basically, the Exil really liked mortars. They were easy and they had high-tech mortars, so they would have the mortars were just pipes, and then these pipes would have legs that would pop out from inside. These were like super high-tech, space-style artillery. And they liked these artillery pieces because they weren't like the normal day artillery we have now. Like you look at the U.S. military, our types of style of mortars, we do have the original style, which is the two legs, leans on its back, and then you can rotate it and zero it in, and then you can drop explosives down the tube, and it bounces, pops, and goes up the air, and it lands on its target. That's a brief understanding of how normal day mortars, especially World War II era mortars, worked. Modern day mortars we have are like super good. We have like the big howitzer guns and stuff that are really popular with the U.S. military now. They're classified as artillery, but you could classify a mortar as an artillery as well if you wanted to. And that's kind of what I did in this story. And so the U.S. didn't have a whole lot of ground artillery at this time because I don't know if anyone understands military technology, but anything that can cause a lot of damage that's stationary usually becomes a target relatively quickly. And so what happened a lot of times, especially around fortresses, so anything we fortified, we would usually have like a couple artillery pieces in there just to give our boys some help on the ground, especially since air combat assistance wasn't always viable in a lot of circumstances. And because of this, our artillery become targets, especially from Exil artillery, which were very easily set up, very easy to dismantle, so they could have an entire mortar team dismantle their entire system in a matter of a minute, 2 minutes tops. And what this caused was they could pound us with artillery for an hour. By the time they stopped and slowed down and we could retaliate, the mortar team was gone. Which means our percentage of casualty rates from mortars and our percentage of casualties we'd given them to their mortar teams were so unfair. We would take millions of casualties to mortars, civilian and military, throughout the war. Meanwhile, they would only have maybe a couple thousand injuries to their mortar teams. Their mortar teams took the least amount of casualties out of any group of their forces. So out of their air force, their navies, their space cruisers, their ground forces, their extraterrestrial planet forces, those all took way higher percentage of casualties than their mortars. And what this caused here in Nigeria was this small group of about 500 to 400 U.S. Marines were pinned down in a woods. Now, I don't know if any of you guys have read about the Battle of Bulge, but this battle is severely kind of leaning towards the Battle of Bulge style. And so one of the famous things about the Battle of Bulge, as well as the Battle of the Wilderness during the American Civil War, so that's two different wars with the same situation, is when you fight in woods, it's really just a bad situation when there's a lot of explosives. Because things like wood splinter, especially during times when their trees are being blown up. When trees blow up, they shoot out small pieces of wood. Sometimes these woods can be a piece of wood as big as a log with a sharp end, or it could be as small as a toothpick, right? And so these men were in the woods. Now it was some elevation to the woods, so it wasn't just a flat tarp like the Battle of Bulge. The Battle of Bulge was more flat along most of the ridgeline that the U.S. troops were in. The Wilderness was a different situation. The Wilderness was more flat as well, but it also had some hills. Especially when the U.S. troops came over to fight the Confederate troops, there would be some inclines they had to go over. Now, this Battle of the Bulge was this battle of the woods combat for the EDF troops would have been primarily an incline, so the Exil coming into the troops' lines would have had to go up a hill almost. And this was a tactical position by the leader John H. Hemingway. Okay, Hemingway, he was a career general at this point in time. I mean, he had over 62 battles under his belt. He had led multiple victories with very minor amount of losses during the war. So he was a very skilled leader. And so he had positioned this tactically so that he would protect his infantry that were there. Unfortunately, things didn't go as planned. The mortars knocked most of the trees in protection, and all the trenches they had built up on the hill were pretty much flattened. He would take over 214 casualties during this initial barrage, which would severely hurt him in the long run. His unit would never survive the war. Majority of his unit would either end up being split up and spread throughout other units because of the casualties sustained at this battle. He could not hold a unit by himself any longer. Now, one of the things that I find super interesting when I was, coming up with this battle is I wanted to tell a story of hand-to-hand combat in a way for people to be like, oh, that's fucking wild. But like, I wanted that moment. Okay, and so one thing you're going to take notice to in this battle as you're reading about it, because I think I'm going to mention this in one of the chapters, is the gruesomeness of this battle. So I want to really nail home the graphicness of Splinters. Okay, this is something that a lot of stories had to do a weird edit there because of the fire signs had to interrupt me, but the graphicness of the Splinters and battles are some of the most horrifying experiences that you can have as a soldier, right? Because they are fast. There's no counter. There's nothing to stop Splinters. I mean, this is something that militaries from around the world have experienced through battles on the sea with wooden ships back in the 1700s, to the troops in the Civil War battling in the wilderness, to the troops in World War I fighting near the Ardennes, to the troops in World War II fighting in the Battle of the Bulge, and from modern-day troops dealing with Civil War-style situations in foreign countries like Ukraine and so on and so forth. And a lot of movies and books and stories don't really revolve around the Splinters, and these are something that you're going to, these soldiers specifically had to experience, right? These guys had to live through it. And so one of the soldiers had wrote in his little personal diary that was discovered after the battle when they were cleaning up the bodies. He had took a moment after the initial barrage. So there was about a 40-minute break between the artillery barrage and the physical land assault. And in this break, he wrote in his diary a letter to his mom. But he also addressed a part to his father specifically. His father was a war veteran from the initial invasion. He fought in a couple of battles in the beginning, lost a leg, so he was military discharged. So he was pretty much working, mailing like letters and stuff back to him. And the soldier describes the battles like a tornado of hate, is the way he coined it. A tornado of hate. And the reason for this is because the Splinters do not discriminate. They do not judge you. They don't care what nationality you are, what color you are, what weight size you are, what race, what sex, any of those things. They just hate you. They hate everything in its path. And so around 162 men out of the 400 men that died were insta-killed from Splinters. Most through neck wounds. So you have a lot of severely important arteries in your throat, believe it or not. One of the fastest ways to kill someone is to take out their throat, because it has such important arteries and such important veins and muscles, and your spinal cord is also there as well. And so a lot of these Splinters would either hit the spine in the back of the neck, causing paralysis to most soldiers. So you had a long, about 26 men in total were counted at the end of the battle to have paralysis, and would later die to the wounds, but their main cause for being demilitarized in that situation was due to just paralysis and not being able to move. And so because of this, Hemingway knew he had to do something. He had to figure out something. So he began moving the wounded about 400 yards southwest of his position to a crater about 400 miles by 400 miles wide. It was a massive crater from the beginning of the war, over 100 years prior. Now, this massive crater was due to a massive explosion from Exil forces, which at that point annihilated the entire African army in one shot. It was a massive explosion, believed to have been over 150 megatons of nuclear explosive, without the radiation, obviously, because the troops were still here. It was considered one of the deadliest defeats for the African campaign ever. And because of this, Hemingway knew that this crater was there. He knew it. And so he placed a lot of the wounded in the crater, buried most of them in sand and dirt and rock and asphalt, whatever he could find. Buried most of them, left their heads poking out, enough for them to breathe, get air, oxygen, water, food, any of those things they needed. Kept 1 or 2 medics and pulled the rest of the troops back to the front lines. Within 15 minutes of retreating back to the front lines, the band began rearming, grabbing some of the ammo left from their comrades that were deceased. And the enemy Exil, around 2,000 strong, launched a full-on assault against the U.S. forces, the EDF forces. And there was not a whole lot for them to do. So the EDF forces, the U.S. forces, had only about 1 automated turret. So a big thing during this time period in this war is a lot of automated stuff. A lot of automated turrets, automated planes, tanks, explosives, things that could be detonated or shot on their own. So that someone with the main force could use a M4 assault rifle and push a button on their phone or a button on their control pad, and they could have defenses. They had 1 automated turret and 3 M40s that were stationed with them. Now, M40s were a controlled LMG. They could shoot around 1,000 rounds every about 3 minutes. So it wasn't the best LMG. These were usually light, but they were very just not controllable. Like they were just they were the poorest of the poorest LMGs. But it was between having a bunch of shitty LMGs or having 1 good LMG. Because LMGs were a very expensive thing. A lot of military groups in the forces a lot of the governmental society didn't see the need for LMGs because they felt like they were not making a difference in the battles, which was partially true. Unfortunately, this would come to fold. The Exil would make it around 300 yards from the front lines, and they stopped. Originally, the scouts, we had two sniper rifle guys, 250 cal snipers, positioned at the very top of the ridge line. So they were about a couple hundred feet in the sky, above the original trench line. So they could see pretty far over the horizon, over to the battlefield. And scouting out, they kind of went, they almost got confused as why they stopped, because even the snipers couldn't tell the reasoning. But within 30 seconds, they would learn the reasoning. There was 2 high-powered. The best way to describe it is an anti-matter rifle, but it's a machine gun that is an anti-matter rifle. And so these Exil have been practicing with different types of weapons, and they found testing these weapons out in small U.S. units and EDF units was the best strategy, because if they got in a firefight, majority of the times they would overwhelm those small groups, so they wouldn't lose any technology in that situation. The 2 anti-matter rifles obliterate the front lines. They also had the help of 1 missile launching, 2-legged tank, which was a hybridized Walker tank style system, but it had missile launchers that it would kneel over, and then it would shoot high-powered missiles at the back of it. Between the 2, the antimatters and the missile launcher, the front lines were in chaos. We're talking mass casualties. Pretty much every man in the unit would be taking a hit during this point, be it hand hits, leg hits, groin hits, head hits, neck hits, body hits, you name it, they got it. Okay. One man had quoted it with being as, if you weren't hit, God loved you. It was a gruesome point. Most men, including Hemingway would have a severe hit to his lower abdomen, causing him to go into a cardiac arrest for part of the battle before the medic was able to get him back up and moving again. But by this point, Hemingway was out of mission. He was, blowing in some ditch along the battlefield. So a lieutenant stood up and took control of the unit. His name was Edward. Edward was a pretty new lieutenant. He had just been promoted before the battlefield, before he went to the battlefield to fight. He was able to tell the radio commander. So most units were set up in a way where there was only one radio commander per unit. This was to save resources, but these radio commanders could reach mainland U.S. So if they need to talk to the high command of the U.S. to inform them of something, these guys were capable of doing it. They had big radios on their back that were high. They had high maintained antennas on the back, so they were very, very, very capable and very easily able to talk to mainland U.S. Remember, at this point in Earth's history, there's not a lot of satellites because most of the Exil forces have knocked down most of our satellites. So talking via satellite was just not an option, right? Internet, cable, those things just aren't acceptable anymore. And due to this specific reason, what you see a lot of times is units being overwhelmed because they don't have their radio guy gets hit first. And if the radio guy gets hit first, there's no communication coming from that unit no more. That's just it. It's over. So the two most important people in the units were usually your medics and your radio controller. So the radio controller and the lieutenant begin speaking on how to get themselves out of the situation. So it turned out that the radio commander had overheard the general or the commanding officer of that unit talking with a fellow group of soldiers to plant C4 along the mountain ridge. They stretched about a mile of explosives along the mountain. Now, normally you wouldn't want to explode artillery underneath you, right? Because that's going to cause a mountain slide. But they realized the mountain slide of explosion was the only method for their survival. And so, at 0400, an hour after the message was sent out to radio command for aerial support, and aerial support never came by this point, they said the last hope was to explode beneath them. Most of the men were out of ammo. At this point, thousands of rounds were shot from the Americans. And so at 0430, the explosives were set off, launching a massive explosion down the mountainside. Now, this mountainside caused a humongous effect of casualties amongst the Exil. The Exil High Command lost 2 of their high commands out of the 3 high commanders that were there. The missile launcher was knocked out of commission, as well as both the anti-matter rifles were knocked out of commission due to this explosion. But there was nearly 1,000 Exil infantry still alive, as well as 1 commander. The Exil commander launched a full-on assault on the mountaintop. The Americans, who were amidst this rubble and this disaster of this mountain ridge falling down on top of them, or from beneath them is a better way of explaining it, they were met with thousands of Exil infantry, hundreds of Exil infantry just pouring over these craters caused from the explosions, and the most brutal hand-to-hand combat in the entire war commenced. This is hand-to-hand combat unlike any other. These Exil fought like beasts, with bestiality in their heads. They would eat and bite and chew, slice, cut, punch, kick. They would growl in the faces of the troops, spitting out acid or opening cans of acid and just throwing it in the soldiers' faces. And they would use their plasma guns that they were running on their infantry, and they would point blank in the head a lot of the infantry, and it was just heinous crimes against humanity. 37 men would live to tell the tale of this battle. 37. Within 2 hours of this hand-to-hand combat, for 2.5 hours, these men endured hell on Earth. Most men were using parts from Exils that were killed to kill the other Exil, using broken pieces of metal. They would rip metal off, the metal armor off the Exil dead corpses, and use it as knives or blades and throwables. A couple of the men, about 15 men, were known to sacrifice themselves. They would attach 2 things of C4 to the chest, running in as suicide bombers to just dwindle the numbers of Exil. I mean, 1,000 Exil against around 250 U.S. Marines. That is a hard battle to win. But at the end of the day, they do and Habs win. Hemingway would make a full recovery and begin leading another unit, a part of another Marine division in Eastern Europe. But he would later return to the battlefield some years later, and he would recount the story. The thing that hits me most when I was creating this battle was that idea of the human spirit just doesn't give up, especially American spirit. American spirit is so much stronger than people like to dismiss. And I know this hasn't been the most exciting gameplay, by the way, in the background, and I apologize. I just don't have a whole lot of gameplay right now. The next episodes will have better gameplay, hopefully. So I hope you enjoy hope you enjoy watching me make classes in the background. But the troops that lived were in such bad shape. Most were injured. Half of the men had broken arms or legs. There was no ammo left on the corpses or on the guys that were alive. Guns were bent from being used as blunt objects. The exil laid on top, dead in piles. Apparently, a rumor says that the piles were so high that you could hide behind them from a nuclear explosion. Don't know how accurate that would be, but that is a theories from the troops that survived, that the piles were so high. And we still don't understand how the American infantry there pulled it off. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. They were clearly outnumbered, outmanned, outgunned. But I think the biggest thing is that the fact that the exil were so beastly in their attack caused the downfall of them. Because they came in not with weapons, but they came in with beast intentions, like monster intentions, and that showed their weaknesses, which surprisingly was that their armor is very open on certain areas. So if you were a ground force and you were trying to push them, and they were fist to fist combat, you could take your pistol out and shoot in between the armor and their body, and it was easy to take down massive amounts of them at once. But that's pretty much all of this story there is. This is only letter 1 of around 2,000 letters that I have ideas for, and I hope you guys enjoyed this. Let me know what you guys think of this. I think this is a better way of connecting with the individual soldiers, or even connecting with the men at the battle, because these battles weren't just battles. These were fights for survival. Almost every single battle that I write isn't just a battle that someone can win or lose. This is a battle where if they lose, there's going to be casualties, unlike any others before. 37 men would make it out of the Nigerian wilderness. They would hold the line, and they killed around 2,200 exil. Around 200 exil mortar teams were killed by the aerial support that came at the end of the battle. U.S. air support did come, just at the end. The reasoning for the air support not reaching is unknown, but a lot of the troops believe that they were sent there to die by the high command. The high command knew the area was tripling with enemy infantry and sent them unprepared, unsupplied, and it was a mistake by the high command to send them there. But obviously the EDF can't admit that, so that will be a story for another day. But shortly after the battle, the wounded would be all exfilled, and there would be a monument placed in the memory of the 5th Marines, who lost 90% of their unit, but were able to hold the day. They were able to win the battle. They were able to hold the glory of winning, and they send a very strong message to the exil that just because we're small doesn't mean we're easily defeatable. Again, hope you guys enjoyed this story. If you guys are interested in more stories from this, make sure you leave a like, subscribe, all that good stuff. Let me know down below what other things you would like to hear about. Like, is there anything specific you would like to hear about? Technology, certain battles, certain people. If you want to hear about how the political system works, you want to learn how food is designed, because a lot of food in this war or this era is going to be GMAs or genetically engineered food. And then obviously you can join my Discord. If you just want to look at my link tree, I'm sure I'll have a link tree down below somewhere. That also has all the information about my book over there. Like the link tree has a work in progress timeline, has a updates so you can see updates and teasers. So I release chapters sometimes over there, and then also a updates where behind the book, which discusses like Earth and the troops and what divisions do what or what they're known for, and just goes really into depth on what each thing is. So if you want to join that, go ahead. We're always welcome. New people over there. And yeah, it's been a longer video, but I hope you guys enjoyed it. And from me and the EDF, we thank you for watching.